what?
Welcome, folks. This is July 20th. It's a meeting of the Legislative Advisory Committee on the State House. We're still continuing our work to determine how the legislature can come back into the State House come January of 2022, sorry. We've made some preliminary decisions, but we really need to spend some time talking about what the capacity, how we're going to determine the committee room space needs and room capacity within those, as well as legislative council needs and space needs there. In human resources and joint fiscal, they've got some additional staff, both entities that are coming on board. So we need to address space needs there. And then we've also been discussing by turning the lounge into a temporary committee room, place somewhere in the building for a replacement of that, which could be those other committee rooms that may be empty. And then, of course, a coat room. And then we'll go into the State House building capacity as a whole for that. So with that, I'm just going to open it up for discussion in terms of committee room space needs. We've talked about committee rooms, temporary. This is all temporary. These are not permanent moves. This is to get us through this next session of 2022, still in the COVID world, whatever that may look like. And we have made a recommendation that rooms 9, 10, and 11 in the lounge be used as temporary committee rooms. The question then becomes, for those committee rooms that will remain in the 30s and 40s and on the Senate side, how do we determine the capacity of those rooms? So that's the question on the table. So Allison?
So we have at least a starting point from which we can launch, right, Madam Chair?
Yes.
So
The ASHRAE,
we have the ASHRAE
which we
standards.
decided not to go with.
We decided not necessarily to be bound by them, but certainly to be, I hope, guided by them. Is that a fair?
I think guided by them within reason. Because some of those are just not going to be possible to meet. So other folks? So I'm going to put something out. Should the room capacity for committee rooms be what that particular room can hold for people being seated?
Oh, as opposed to anyone standing up or in a windowsill, properly seated.
For folks to be seated, that would be the determining factor. Butch?
Thank you. Alice, I think that's a great idea. We heard that early on from Chief Romei of people sitting down in a committee room. The logistics will have to be determined on how the flow in and out of the committee room goes, especially the Senate side, I think probably has a little more leeway with the availability of overriding the HVA system in the committee rooms that we've talked about. So we have a little more capacity in those rooms, maybe, but the House side, we don't. So I think starting with the premise that if you're in the committee room and seated, you're in the committee room and seated, but nobody should be standing in a committee room, and that would help. It would help the chair. It would help the other folks to know the bounds of who can and can't be out of the committee room. There's some logistics going on there. If you know, if we can't get a witness in that maybe he's on deck or within an hour or so of coming into the room and they might have to go to the cafeteria and wait, and how do we notify those people that they're up next? And that was just brought up to me by someone, and I think that's something that the committee or somebody will have to discuss and figure out those logistics, but I don't think it's insurmountable. But I think the premise of having people, places for people to sit could be a really great start for the conversation.
John?
One thing I'm wondering is if there are people that are still concerned about maintaining some distance because of infectious diseases, you could probably stand in a corner with more separation than if you're seated in many of those rooms. So that's one factor to think about. Maybe people would be more comfortable not sitting right next to someone, but there's space in the room. And the other thing that comes to mind is sometimes people have back pain, some back issues where sitting is uncomfortable. So there might be people who want to be there who need to stand. So we wouldn't want to be chasing out people for that reason. Couple of thoughts.
Right, but I'm just thinking of, we all sit in our own committee room. So I'm thinking of when my committee room gets full, we've got people sitting, and then we have folks standing by the door. And then sometimes we have people standing behind the chair and vice chair in sort of the window well. So I think that's what we're trying to avoid when we say seating capacity, that you're not cramming in more people that are taking up that common space near the door or behind the witness or behind the chair, and vice chair. For the committee. Allison. And
So
then Janet.
has Janet, or have we had an opportunity to mesh the ASHRAE guidance, let's say, with the notion of the seated capacity in each room? So have you done that?
Yes.
On top, as usual.
So
Okay.
we have done that. We've gone around to the rooms. We based it on, and that we're very close to what these numbers are anyway. But it just makes good sense. And I'm understanding what you're saying, John, but I think we could still keep those capacity numbers and still allow for people to stand up and,
Yeah.
you know, that if the back's hurting or
Yeah,
whatever.
particularly committee
Keep the
members.
same numbers, not put more people in because they can stand, but be able to get up and move around a little.
And I think if we do that in combination, and I know that we're not going to make a recommendation, at least I would think we're not, in terms of what committees go in what room, and particularly the room 9, 10, 11 in the lounge. That's a decision higher up than us. But we could make a recommendation that those committees that are going to have a heavy workload, they're going to have issues that are volatile and will bring in a lot of folks from the public, the priority should be that they would have these larger rooms. That could be a recommendation that we give. It doesn't mean that it will be accepted. But if we do that as a premise, then for those other committees, particularly on this House side, could be agriculture, institutions, transportation. Some of those other committees don't draw as many people on a continuous basis. They could go into another committee room in
vacated
the
rooms.
30s or
Yeah.
in the 40s. for that.
So, and we have the science on that because the committee assistants keep tab on attendance and numbers and witnesses. So we know who gets on a regular basis the most number of witnesses, the most number of, the highest
Mhm.
attendance. So that is science we can apply to that decision in a recommendation. Now, obviously, both appropriations committees get huge amount of attendance and probably the most, and the two in finance and ways and means. So there are 4 committees that get hugely attended to, but there are others obviously too. So we could maybe at our next meeting get from Mike or Peggy those numbers, because those are all tracked.
But that won't be for us to make those ultimate decisions. We can make what I'm thinking, and we may not agree with it as a committee. We could make that recommendation that the committees that really should be taking up the larger rooms that are temporary are those with the heaviest workload, the most controversial issues, that's going to draw in a lot of people. And then just leave it at that and let the chips fall where they may. Go ahead, Joe.
So I want to divide the question for most workload from the question of the most witnesses, because those two things don't necessarily line up. Any given day, the population of the judiciary and the Senate side could overwhelm that of appropriations. Allison, when you're talking about keeping statistics, I don't think committee assistants keep statistics on anything beyond who the witnesses are.
Yeah, you're probably right. I realize that the attendance is slightly different.
My concern is that if you have assumptions made, we start making recommendations based on assumptions that aren't backed up by fact, that becomes problematic. So I just wanted to divide those two questions. Heavy workload is one thing. My committee, when we begin, we don't have the bill. Our workload is much different at the end of the session than it is at the beginning of the session. And every committee has an ebb and flow on its workload. I think the ultimate answer to our problems is going to be training each chair on what to do in the event a room reaches some common understanding of uncomfortableness, whatever that will be. And the chairs are going to have to take the bull by the horns, because committee assistants are not going to become the enforcers. When somebody comes into a room, I know I personally, when I walk into a room, if I don't see a chair for me to sit down in, I'm not going to walk in there and stand just because I want to twiddle my time. I'm probably going to vacate. But if it reaches that level, say a high school group comes in, we'll use judiciary as an example. We've had situations where we've had lots of witnesses, lots of lobbyists, and then all of a sudden Mount Anthony High School shows up. And Dick Sears, of course, would love to have those kids in the room. And on one occasion, a young lady standing right behind my chair fainted. And luckily I had figured out that that was about to happen and leaped out of my chair so she could sit down. But the upshot is every chair has got to be cognizant of what's going on in the room and take control. If the room becomes such that there are far too many people, chair has to take the reins and say, we're going to take a break now. We're going to evacuate the room. We're going to let the air get replaced somehow, but we're going to leave the room. And I don't see any other way we're going to be able to get control over this without putting a sign on the door that says X number of people, period, nobody else. And I don't think that's where we want to go. The reason I don't think that's where we want to go is you may have an issue on a particular day that needs to have all of the lobbyists listening to each other in the conversations taking place, as well as whatever witnesses are coming in. I don't think you want to be in a position of excluding based on a simple number as opposed to the content of what's going on in the room. So I'm coming back to the conclusion that we've got to train chairs to monitor the capacity and take appropriate steps when that capacity has been breached. Shut up.
Well, the question then is, how do we determine what that capacity is?
Right.
Is it fluid in terms of day-to-day operations? Is it fluid in terms of what topic you're hearing testimony on?
It's a fair question, Alice, but
I don't
you know,
know.
I wouldn't want to predict for your committee what is an appropriate number of people in your room. Because I just don't know the content of what you're discussing and what has to happen in order for you to get your work product done. That has to be within the prerogative of the chair. And the chair and leadership, it seems to me, has to be the spear point of what goes on in each committee room. I would hate to have Senate members either recommending or dictating what House committees should be doing and vice versa. By the same token, I know we have to have people comfortable, we have to have them safe, but that really is going to depend day to day on the content of what's being discussed and the flow of people coming in and out of the room, which can really only be monitored and enforced by the chair.
It's
Um,
unrealistic to
Ruth,
change
and then-
by subject.
Let's go to Ruth and then Alice.
Thank you. I agree that the chair needs to be the one that enforces the rules of the room, not the committee assistant. I do think it will be easier for chairs to do that, though, if there's a posted number. So that if you're in room, whatever, the health and welfare committee room, and, you know, Senator Lyons knows that there's a limit of 12 people or whatever the limit is, I don't know. Then she can enforce it based on saying, this is the limit of the room. You know, we all need to vacate now, and then we'll let 12 people back in, or the committee members plus the committee assistant, the legal counsel plus 4 more people, or whatever, because I think that will be, it will avoid uncomfortable situations where the chair is subjectively choosing who gets to stay in the room. It's and when they have people, I'd much rather have. And I also agree, we have to have training for the chairs on how to appropriately do it so that they don't get put in a bad position. I also would hope that, you know, we're all flexible so that if we do have a committee that is taking on a controversial topic, like the Judiciary Committee is doing, I don't know, a bill about firearms, for example, that we would have a larger room for that committee that day to say maybe the Judiciary Committee uses room 11 that day. And we are flexible in swapping rooms out so that there's that ability to go with the ebb and flow of the topics, like you said, but also to have a standard for each room.
Allison?
Yeah, I think that's going to be a challenge unless we all become turtles and carry everything with us all day long. I mean, I think it's a great idea that we would be nimble enough to pivot by subject per day, anticipating more attendance than not. I think that's something we would need to work on, because I think that would be a challenge, particularly for the House, where they really settle in all day, as opposed to those of us who are used to being turtles a bit
I
by
didn't mean it
shifting.
being every single day people switched around, but if there was a specific bill that
Yeah.
was, you know, causing a lot of attendance or something like
Yeah,
that.
I think that's Joe's idea, is that we be a little more flexible about room use.
So that feeds in as well to our later discussion about how do you define overflow for 109 and 133, because the thinking in that world was if you've got testimony scheduled on a volatile issue that's going to draw in a lot of people, in our normal world, we would be scheduling room 10 or 11 or Ethan Allen when it was available. So we've got to make up for losing those rooms to committee rooms. So the thinking was that 109 and 133 would be used for those situations. That was the thinking. Janet?
So I understand what you're saying. This room particularly can hold 43 or 49, whatever it is. And the rooms in the other buildings can only hold 26 or 27. Now, not that we're sticking with those numbers particularly,
Right.
but it's still, it would be good perhaps if we could leave this room available as a overflow for Senate Judiciary. And I understand Senator Benning, because it is up to the chair and how they want to function in their committee. But it does pose a security risk as far as, you know, when the young woman had the incident in that room, it took a while to get to her, probably more than we would have liked to get everybody out. And then people were talking about comfortability, you know, if you just want to get up and use the restroom. I mean, these rooms have been way more crowded than we need be. And as we say, don't let a good crisis go to waste. Maybe this is the time to kind of pull that back in a little bit. And
Yes.
to the idea of if we had a capacity number, it does take the pressure off the chair. And Chief Romeo, he came up with the idea, like it could be as simple as just a little placard for the doorknob. When it's 18, we're up to capacity, just put it on the door. And then if you did need to move to another room for a bigger subject, you could come in here. And the other thing I'd like to say is, do we ever have enough rooms? For instance, in Senate Judiciary, when there's a hot button issue, we always are excluding people because they just don't fit, no matter what you make that number.
I completely agree, Janet, and I come back to the number on the door is one thing. But we still have to have chairs taking the bull by the horns and becoming aware and enforcing the capacity. Even if you have a number on the outside of the door, the next witness who's scheduled is going to poke their head in that door and look around. They're not going to count the number of people who are in there. They're going to want to squeeze in and figure, all right, I'm supposed to be on at 2:15. It's 2:17. I don't want to be late or missing something. But that goes back to the chair having to literally take control and understand. And I think this is going to require some serious training for chairs.
But the chairs are gonna need to have some backup so that there's some uniformity in those decisions, so it's not subjective.
Right.
That's because that's gonna get people in trouble. John and then Butch.
Well, that was the main question that popped into my mind, is if you have a witness come in because they're ready, and no one's leaving, how do you decide who has to leave? If you're a lobbyist and you're being told it's your turn to leave, you might not be too happy, or, you know, whoever it is, you don't want to be the one. So how do you decide?
I think that's going to require serious training. I know if Paul Heinz is the next person coming in the door, I'm not going to say it's time for Paul to leave. As chair, I would say it's time for us to vacate this room. We'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll see how the air is doing. I don't know how else you're going to get around the fact we have to live with what we have for constructed building. And there's really no way to put a sign on the door and expect that people are going to look in the room and count around and see how many are in there. And then you have the problem of the witnesses who are due to come up next. They may look around and say, oh, I've exceeded X number, because they're familiar with the building and what the systems are. And if they then wander about the halls, am I going to send my committee assistant out to go find them? I think that's another concern we have to think about, because that impacts work product.
Well,
Butch, Allison.
I'll pass them. See Anthony.
Okay, Anthony, Allison, John, and then Butch.
Shall we quickly, just in terms of this conversation, which is a difficult one to sort of wrangling over for the last couple of weeks. I think that if the problem with telling chairs that they have to vacate the room, if there's 15 people in the room and that's too much, then I say, now we're going to vacate, those 15 people are still going to want to come back in when the time comes to come back in. So you still get this question of who you eliminate is still out there. And the one good thing about having the seating requirement or capacity based on seating is if somebody opens the door and looks at the room, they could see if there's an open seat. If there's no seats, then you close the door. I'm not saying that's good, ideal by any means, because we don't want to lock anybody out or make anybody feel that they can't come in the room. But if you have a seating capacity based on the number of seats, it's easy enough for people to see that, all right, there's no room for me. Doesn't solve the problem. It just points out more the dilemma.
Doesn't it depend on who's in the seat?
No, it probably does. I think it will, and something, in a lot of people's minds it will.
If I'm in the seat and I'm not a witness and I'm not the press, but I'm a member of the public who's listening to my committee go on, don't I have a right to be in the seat?
Yes.
We'll have to decide first come, first serve, or we'll have to make those decisions. That will be another decision point.
But I think
Go
the
ahead.
idea of asking anybody to leave is really problematic. in a democracy. You can't be in the room when the policymakers are having a discussion. It's just not a good thing to deal with.
Allison.
So I think it's very easy for committee assistants to have the cell phones and text. I mean, we do a ton of texting. It texts them to come in now, your time is up. And witnesses can leave when they're done. I think there could be an expectation that witnesses don't linger, that there isn't a replacement, but that maybe you go one over for the witness. I also think vacating the room will take so much time and be so disruptive to the flow of the ideas and the flow of policy work. I think we really will have to figure out how to solve this because vacating it would just be a huge time suck, I think. And but I think that we could come up with very efficient ways for witnesses to be informed. They're on deck. They come in, they testify. That there's no expectation that people linger necessarily. And I think we'll have to figure out who gets a seat. You know, is it first come, first serve? Is it people, the lobbyists who are on that subject? Is it who is it? And that's a tough and thorny thing we'll have to work through.
So John and then Butch.
It sounds really simple to just say, wait in the hall till it's your turn to testify and then leave, but it often doesn't work that way in my experience. If you have 2 hours of testimony and 10 witnesses, for example, it's often important for the witnesses to hear what each other has said and contribute. And the chair will often go back to witnesses who've already spoken to as ideas come forward to see what they have to say about that. So just because you're finished testifying doesn't mean that the committee chair doesn't still need you in the room.
That's right.
Butch.
So thanks. I think it's really important for the safety of the chair to have some sort of a number base of people allowed in the room. It will at least give the chair some standing when the chair says, okay, we're full, people aren't comfortable anymore, we're full. And without that standing, I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on the chair to, I don't know, do what. But people that I know are comfortable when you tell them a building is full.
Yeah.
You go to the movie theater and there's no seats left, the building's full, you can't go. You go to a public meeting in a lot of towns, the meeting room's full, you can't go in. It's just because it's full. And maybe you're violating maybe occupancy limits, certified occupancy limits of the building. We don't have those occupancy limits here yet. So we have to have some way of coming up with that. I can see us continuing to Zoom committee meetings. And I don't see Kevin in here shaking his head, no, but we may be able to do that. So if we have a witness coming in, maybe that witness can go to the cafeteria and pick us up on Zoom until they can get in there. Something that may need to stop. We may need to ask the lobbyists not to send their reporters in and sit in our committee room all day long. Let them do it on Zoom. Let them report what the committee's doing from what they see on Zoom, because many times, it's been my experience, is that 2 or 3 lobbying firms will bring people in and they sit in the room all day long taking notes. And that may have to be a casualty of the temporary system that we're trying to develop here. So I think there's a way we need to do this. There's a way we can support chairs in their managing. Now they're going to go be chairs. Now are going to go beyond managing the committee and now manage the room. So anything we can do to help them manage their room. Maybe we'll have to go to a system like you go to the restaurant and make a reservation. When it's your turn next, the little buzzer goes off and you get a little pager, and the pager goes off. You know that your table's ready. So maybe we might have to go to a system like that. Is that doable, Kevin? Good. Yeah, I'm glad you missed it. How about you?
Just say yes.
I was talking about notifying witnesses by a
Yeah,
pager.
pager. You'll get buzzed.
Yeah.
Oh, God, let's not.
Yeah, but you'll think your panini's ready.
Yeah.
Allison and then Ruth, and then I also want to offer, folks who are also members of this committee to weigh in too, because sometimes you've been in the public. weighing in, sitting in committee rooms. as well.
So just to
So I
tag
was-
on to Butch's idea, I mean, we now will have, I believe, Kevin, all these committee meetings will still be on YouTube. So people they don't have to be in the room to hear what's happened. They can go and listen in real time, very close to real time, what's going on.
That's true.
So we don't need to have that young intern who's there taking notes. They can watch it on YouTube or they can listen later.
Kevin?
Kevin Ward, IT. So assuming the decision of the recommendation of this committee is to continue streaming these meetings, then yes, that's true. But I think it is pending that decision from my perspective. We're working in that direction. That's what we expect, but we are awaiting formal decisions. That's true.
Ruth, and then I'd open it up to folks who are also members of this committee that have been bystanders.
I agree with a lot of what Butch was saying, and I think that if we are clear with everyone about what the new rules are and the new reality is, then we're gonna get most people who are here on a regular basis cooperating. I'm not saying everybody will, but most people who work in this building on a regular basis, including staff and lobbyists and advocates, are gonna wanna follow the rules and they're gonna understand why they exist. And I think that everybody's comfort levels are gonna be different. And even those lobbyists and members of the press may not be comfortable anymore being in these crowded rooms. And so they're hopefully gonna want to cooperate, especially given that we will likely be live streaming. And in my other summer committee, we've already talked about where our first meeting in person is next week. And we've talked about what are we gonna say to members of the public and witnesses, et cetera, about, because it will be our first in-person meeting next week. And just making clear, like, participation remotely is always an option, and we encourage you to do it. And it's a good thing that that's an option. And we ask that you let us know if you're a witness, if you'll be remote or not. But I think if you have that option of remote and you say, look, I even said to tell witnesses, we will be following room capacity limits. And so if there is overflow, it may be better to participate remotely. So just making sure everything is clear up front, and then people aren't surprised by being asked to leave the room. And then they might think, oh, well, next time I'll just follow the committee remotely because I don't want to have to stand in the hallway. So, and only come when I really, really need to be there.
But there's a different feel during a legislative session than summer study committees.
Well,
There is a
sure
different
there is,
feel.
but I also think it's people who are here on a regular basis are gonna understand why we're doing what we're doing and are going to try to be part of the community that's working toward a state house that we all can feel comfortable in. And if people are fainting in the rooms, that's not a good place. It's not a safe place. It's not a comfortable place. And if people are feeling uncomfortable because they're sitting next to people they're not sure are vaccinated, that's not a safe or comfortable place. And so we need to make sure that the messaging is we're trying to make this place comfortable and safe for everyone as much as possible. And we hope that everyone cooperates. We ask that everyone cooperate, and the rules will be followed.
Right.
Kevin, a
Mhm.
practical question based on Ruth's comments. Hey, Kevin. Assuming the decision was made that all committee rooms shall have remote capabilities, how long of a period of time does it take you from that decision to when you can actually have that all installed?
We would have liked the answer a couple months ago.
Yeah, I think-
We will continue to work towards it. We have some limited services in place, primarily in the house. We are working towards assumptions at this point of what it could look like. If you anticipate these decisions, to try to shorten that time frame. Our hope is that after this committee finishes its work, it issues, it's important that the other committees that are receiving that information take action promptly. So we can then in turn submit our orders. We're at the mercy of supply chains.
What do you see as your drop dead date for having that marching order?
I would like to see it no later than mid-September to make sure that we are as close to ready to go in January as possible. Again, we're at the mercy of supply chains.
So I know legislators have been dominating this conversation. Are there insights or thoughts from folks who are usually in the audience in these committee rooms? So Eric, and you're here on behalf of Commissioner Fitch, correct?
Eric Philcorn, Department of Buildings and General Services, on behalf of Commissioner Fitch, and also speaking as a backbencher in a
Yes,
couple of
you
committee
are.
rooms. I really like the idea of limiting it based on the seating capacity of the room. I think once we get a bunch of people standing in a committee room, no matter what the current health conditions are, it just becomes kind of unmanageable. I think it's important as you develop this policy to account for Ledge Council and JFO and, key people that right now you have seats marked out reserved for them, but like, how does it work if they walk in and they bounce someone? Will the chair say, please yield the JFO seat, or, it's just a management thing to contemplate. And I support the idea of developing streaming capability in all the committee rooms so that you can relieve the pressure, because there are probably a lot of people who would prefer to just do it with their jammies on. So
Not you, though.
not me. No, I'm with you. I might wear a mask, but I'll be with you.
Other folks? David?
I just want to emphasize what Ruth just said, which is that we remind ourselves that we are Vermont in a pandemic. We are not some other part of the country in a pandemic, thankfully. And consequently, I can't imagine that the occupants of this building are not going to take that seriously as they already have. And their behavior as such, I'm guessing, will be just as good as it has been. So I think we don't have as much to fear, but I also want to go back to what Janet said, which is using this moment to broaden participation of the public in the process in this building that means so much in that way, because thankfully the pandemic has suddenly opened it up to the people in an entirely new way. And thus technology is really the saving grace for what we're about to go through, meaning people are not really being restricted from the process. There are other ways that they can participate, thankfully. And I think we should take advantage of the emergency to bring better behavior within the building and capacity, taking capacity in the rooms seriously and never going back again, so that we can operate that way and be assured that we're not restricting people from participation.
Sure.
David, let's assume this room has reached capacity. Ian Galloway walks through that door and Paul Hines walks through that door. What should the chair do at that point?
Duck.
Adjourn.
There you go. There's your answer. And first.
And what should the chair do at that point? We have to have this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. But I think the press especially understands capacity issues and takes that seriously. So I honestly think they will all be their colleagues, they're companions. They're not just competing with each other. They all have access in their various ways to what they need in the process. And I think if were it not for technology, we wouldn't be so clear about that. But we've already made huge advances. You've already, won over the curator to allow rooms to look somewhat 21st century, in addition to the 19th century that I tend to favor. But I'm hoping the chambers begin to look a little more 19th century. That would be the place where I would fight a battle to try to get back to what in person looks a little better in those chambers. But in the committee rooms, in the hearing rooms, I think technology needs to have a fairly free rein so that the bigger audience can be a part of everything that's going on here.
So we have our legal counsel that wants to weigh in, and then Stephen from BG.
I just have a question. Who is the press?
Yes, right. Who's the press?
Figured that out, yeah.
I think there are a lot of people today who claim
They're the press.
that they are press. They might not be part of the press association. Might have credentials. That's another question I think.
Can I speak to Michael's press
Yep.
question?
Butch.
So and thank you for that. Thank you for saying who is the press. And I've been watching the governor's press conferences throughout the entire pandemic. And the governor, whomever, limited attendance in the pavilion building to, I think he just did mainstream media, just the TV stations. Am I on that correctly?
So that's a question that you could follow the governor did.
Right.
Some other criteria.
Right, because now, but the media has taken to calling in.
Right.
And more media has availed themselves to the press conferences. Prior to that, if I remember correctly, when he had press conferences up in the ceremony office, all he had was the mainstream media
Like
there.
you would limit them there. so-
Yeah, so, I mean, we're hearing from newspapers and other media outlets all over the state via phone. So limiting,
My concern is the non-traditional press person who is not going to Monday by a criteria set
okay.
and say that they're not.
Yeah, I don't know, and maybe you know how they limited to who was, were the people calling it registered with his
I
folks?
can vet that with the governor.
You could what,
I
Michael?
can vet that with the governor. I can
Thank
do
you.
that.
Thank you.
I got Steve, but I have my. Okay, Steve, is this on this particular issue?
It is
Okay, so Stephen and then Matt.
great. Steve, Brian, Jessica.
Oh, and I forgot Steve Perkins. Yeah, I know.
Just to supplement this conversation, I think rather than actionable thing for the report is setting up clear criteria or clear guardrails. So to speak, of these different pieces and parts that set up the rules of the game to interact with the state house in a clear, consistent, managed way. Then it will be easy for people. Or easier for people to play with the rules. But if they're not easy to understand, thought through, and then equitably managed during the actual legislature. That's maybe where the problem is.
I think that's what we're grappling with in terms of what are the parameters. And we can't even figure out the parameters. That's what we're grappling with at this point. So Matt, and then I know Steve Perkins has had his hand up, but we sort of took a right-hand turn when we started talking about a large room and the press wants to come in. What will we do?
Matt Romack, Capitol Police. I would only implore upon you as the person that probably ends up having to execute these rules, to please, whatever they are, make them consistent. across the board, from one place to the other, from one space to another. And they have to be equally applied content. I would say that when you start talking about the press, there is a very easy way out. And that's telling the rules. We have talked in it, I've talked a lot, based on the incidents we've had during our large joint sessions with the legislature about, who gets access to the press account. It's kind of an open, it's been an open season, so. And one of the things that we looked at as an idea was, maybe there is a State House Press Association that gets a print, a broadcast, a radio, a blog, online, that's something else. Whatever it is, and let them make it. That's generally, that's a huge generalization, but that's generally how it works in DC, is the press boards there make access rules, and they enforce it on each other. Quite frankly, as far as where they can be, where they can be, where they can and can't. I suspect you may end up in some of these small rooms with pool, boarding, if you will, which there's someone challenge to negotiate on some of our things, but it is, it has been not a problem, just a challenge. It's like, what do we do? To Mike's point, who is the leader? And the easiest way seems to be what they're.
So before, I want to allow Steve Perkins to ask a question too, because he's had his hand up. Also, Mike Farrant just indicated that if you're speaking and you're not speaking into a mic and you're speaking from the audience, YouTube cannot pick that up, and the folks who are listening in on YouTube cannot hear what you are saying. So if you're to speak, you need to come up to the table, here, the witness table, so that you're on the camera and you will be heard to folks who are streaming in. So that's a little learning for when committees are meeting during the session. If we're going to be live streaming, that there's going to be different dynamics. If you're sitting in a committee room and someone on the side of the committee that you ask them a question, they will not be able to be seen possibly or heard to folks on YouTube unless they physically get into the witness chair. That may be a way that we'll have to deal with or not. We don't know yet, but just keep that in the back of our minds. So Steve Perkins.
Thank you
Finally.
very much. I apologize for not being with you today. We're quite short-staffed here, but technology allows me to participate and also test out some of these issues. And I do agree, I can't hear a thing that's happening in the audience. So I've missed the majority of this conversation that has happened off camera. I believe I'm on this committee by statute to offer a number of skill sets. One of them is not how committees operate, but I can tell you that as someone that does testify in front of committees, the idea of limiting it to open chairs is fine with me, and I would endorse streaming all committee rooms because if you're not in the chair, as it were, you could be anywhere else following the committee on your phone or on your personal device. So I think there is a technological solution to that. Even if you were called in and then you left and you were called back in again, the chair could ask you to wait in the hall, wait in a waiting room or whatever, and you could still follow the conversation. That being said, to the conversation about the press, I didn't hear all the definitions of what press was, but from my experience in just watching the press, there are many instances with crowded rooms when there's a pool camera or one access point, and then the press uses that one access point to report on what's going on. And would that be appropriate if we were streaming all of our the committees, that could be considered a pool camera, and the press would gather their information from that, and then you wouldn't have to worry about all the chairs. So with that, thank you, and thank you for excusing my absence from the room.
Great, thank you, Steve. Allison?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why we're in a way having this conversation about the press, although I certainly appreciate what Matt had to say, that it might be a great way for them to sort of resolve it. But why is the press any more important than any other person who's wanting to be in the room? I don't think they have any precedent over anybody else who is wanting to attend a hearing. So that is the great plus of streaming, is that we are able to make it accessible for everybody to listen to a proceeding. But I don't think that, I don't think we, there could conceivably be a saved chair for press, one for JFO, one for Ledge Council. I mean, we could conceivably save a single spot in each room, but I don't think the press is any more, the public is as important. I mean, every one of those attending is fair game. I don't think that we have to.
Ruth?
Well, first of all, Steve, I'm thank you for participating remotely so that we can use you as a guinea pig. And I think no apology is necessary. I think we need to get over the fact that you shouldn't have to apologize. It's actually good that you're participating remotely because we can use your experience, but also because we have fewer people in the room now because you're not here, like physically in the room. Yeah, no, not you. Before I was a legislator, I twice was asked to leave a room as a member of the public. Once it was in the balcony of the Senate chamber because there are apparently limits, or I was told there were limits because of the structural concerns with the balcony. And so I think it was on the first day of the legislative session when there were a lot of people here, and I didn't think anything of it. I'm like, it's an old building. I don't want the balcony to fall in. Of course I'm going to leave. I don't have to be there. I just wanted to be there. And then there was another time, I can't remember what it was, but it didn't obviously make me, I thought it seemed reasonable. So I think back to what I said before, I think most people think it's reasonable. I think, Allison, the reason that we're focusing on the press is for constitutional issues that, that there's a, concern about access to our work from the media. So I think that's why, but I'm wondering, were we planning on having anybody from the press come and
Is there a
testify
constitutional
or-
requirement that the press be present? I don't think so.
Not specifically, but like First Amendment, freedom of the press, access to government. I think that's sort of, but there's no requirement that lobbyists get access to our work, in that same way. But were we going to have other testimony, or were we focusing on, I know that
We're trying to
Joe's
focus on
committee had
room
testimony on it.
capacity. That's what we're trying to focus on. So we haven't gone into the minutia of who to come in to testify specifically on these, but Joe's jumping at the bit right now.
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, Ruth, I heard you were kicked out because it was what you were shouting from the rafters.
Jesus.
Allison, I just wanted to come back to your question. We had a lot of testimony from the press in our committee just before we left the session. And the press is adamant that they want back into the access that they had to us previously. And literally it got to a point where Paul Heinz was saying very plainly he was going to threaten litigation. Whether that's happening or not is irrelevant. I just want you to know that we did have a lot of testimony from the press, and they are concerned. Literally what they produce on a screen at night has been impacted due to Zooming. You and I don't appear as often on the screen, or any of our colleagues, because of the Zoom limitations that they all experienced. And they made that very clear, that without direct access to us in the building, in the hallways, in the committee rooms to listen to what's going on, it subtracts from their ability to put context into the stories that they are reporting. Whether you agree with that or disagree with that, more power to you, but I wanted you to know that this is the kind of information that they presented to us, and they are very concerned about having the access that they normally had in the building.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I did not notice they had any trouble accessing any of us individually during the course of the session.
So if I could mention something here, I think it's really important for the press to know the give and take that occurs within a legislative committee and the committee discussion. Over time, I've noticed that the press used to sit in the committee room and listen to the committee deliberation. And they had a much better understanding of the particular issue that was being debated and the resulting vote and the resulting legislation. Over time, they have sat in our committee rooms less and less. They don't listen to the deliberation that occurs. They only come in for the sound bite at the end. And if we push them away further, it's going to be even less knowledge of our deliberation. I just want to put that out there. That has occurred over the past 30 to 40 years. They used to sit in our committee rooms all day long to listen to the give and take. That's not happening now. But would that happen if it was live streamed? I don't know. But I think we need to be very cautious that we are thinking that we're putting ourselves out there live streaming for all to see, but in effect, we may be isolating ourselves even more. I just want folks to think that through and make sure we have a balance.
And Alice, their budgets, of course, have been cut considerably during the course of that time. So
But
we have
that's
fewer
out of
people.
our
Yeah.
bailiwick. I just want to say how it plays out in the building, in our committee rooms. And the press is an integral part of how we as legislators connect with our constituents. It's an integral part. The more they can understand the background of an issue, the more fair reporting they will do. The less they understand it, the more sound bites they will have. And that could be to our detriment as running government. Which,
Going to swing away from the press.
yes, let's get back to room capacity.
Capacity.
Yes, I'm going to swing back to the capacity. I think we have two questions to answer. First question would be, and I think we need to answer these questions sooner than later. Do we want to do committee room capacity limits? That would be the first question. And for me, the second question is, how do we do it? And then, do we do it by opening it up to anybody that can squeeze in, or do we do it by something more obvious of the number of seats available within the committee? You know, those are the two questions that we have to answer. Answer those questions. You're the chair, but I'm not sure we need to answer those questions today, but the sooner the better.
Well, we need to have some direction, and I don't think we're going to put anything that is a line in the sand or written in stone. But, you know, I'm sitting here thinking of being chair of a standing committee and the ebb and flow that occurs. And I think part of a seating capacity, we have the seating capacity as our backup. Quite often, I've noticed in my particular committee room, and Butch, you were sitting there as well. Sometimes it'd be crowded, somebody would pop in, they'd see it, and they'd say, I'll be back later. Or we'd say to them, we're not there yet in the testimony, you're scheduled for another topic. We're 10 minutes late, and they would go up to the cafeteria. I think there needs to be some ebb and flow like that. We can have a seating capacity of what that particular room can hold for the committee members, for our legislative staff, our assistant, our lawyer, and JFO. Not all committees have JFO. Not all committees have their lawyer sitting in there 24/7 the whole time. But I think if we had the seating capacity as a backup, we could at least put a placard out there that we're at capacity. That then begs the question, what do we do with overflow? Do we have overflow somewhere in the building? Would the overflow be in the cafeteria when it's not lunchtime? Do we keep room 11 here as the overflow? You know, I think it's going to be fluid. I don't think it's going to be something that is going to, I think there needs to be structure, but I think there needs to be fluidity in that structure. And I think we also have to make sure it's not subjective. Because it's going to be really difficult for chairs if they don't have something to fall back on to say the room is at capacity. Whatever that capacity is, if it's seating capacity, then sometimes you can take a break and say, you know, we're finishing up with this testimony. We're going to move on. Let's take a break. And sometimes you can't. And that's what I'm struggling with. Yeah. Where you've got to have some fluidity, but I'm concerned about what the chief Romeo said. It can't be subjective because then it's really gonna hurt individual chairs.
Right.
Anthony and then Allison.
I just said two thoughts. One is maybe we're ready as a group to take a straw poll as to whether or not we believe seating-based capacity is the way to go. It doesn't have to be a binding vote. We're talking about something a lot, and I wonder if people have made up their minds a little bit, are ready to at least say where they stand at this moment. In terms of overflow, I've had this image of the round tables in the cafeteria, each having a monitor on them, which allows people to sit around that round table and monitor what's going on in a particular committee. I have no idea whether that's practical or not, but I could see a number of people who are interested in an issue, can't get in the room, go to the cafeteria, and there's a monitor on one of the round tables. I don't know why I'm saying the round tables, but I have this image of people that will sit around and like zoom into a particular committee meeting and then, you know, understand, well, I should go downstairs, I'm going to come up soon, it'll be my turn, or, you know, we have somebody testifying, but the person from people from that person's organization might want to be able to listen in. Whatever reason they might want to, people are going to stick around the State House anyway. This gives them a place to go and zoom into a particular meeting that they might be interested in.
Allison?
Well, clearly, having served together for so many years in GovOps, it's rubbing off because I was about to say the same thing. I think we're ready. I think there's some consensus from what I'm hearing about using seating capacity in a room. It's critically important to have set that, and the cafeteria until otherwise determined is certainly an overflow possibility. So great minds.
Can I ask
Great.
a question?
Sure.
I don't know who this question is, maybe Janet. If we're talking about seating capacity rather than airflow capacity, there's obviously a difference, right? Yes. Some of the rooms would have larger seating capacity if the furniture were different.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm thinking, for example, the Senate Education Committee room, when I served in there, one of the barriers to having space was the chairs that senators sat in are ginormous, and they would take up a ton of space. They're clearly made for tall. They're made for Joe Benning, not Ruth Hardy.
He asked to downgrade my tall chair because I didn't like it.
You just get
I
big,
mean,
not
one
left
of
or right.
one of the things to create more space in the rooms would be to change the furniture, and also in some places there are extra things in the room. I guess I'm trying to parse out the difference between there's two different safety issues. There's airflow and air quality / air quality. I'm really different. Yes. And then there's like actual space and being able to get out of the room because you have chairs in the way is a possible problem. So
The counts that we did are based on the furniture that was in there.
oh wait, it was
Right, but we also took in consideration if the House committee wanted to go to a Senate committee, if their configuration of desks would fit in the Senate room, we took that. We were just kind of thinking through some things like that. So you're right, it's two different things. And I think we need to come to an agreement, like on the limited ASHRAE numbers up in the 30s of 7, even though I know we're not going by that. But if we're gonna take your room, for instance, Alice, you've got 11 members, and so that's putting that up to 15, 16 people in that room, and the ASHRAE is 7 in there. Are we willing to stretch it that far? That's a question that I have.
yeah.
But I understand what you're saying about the chairs, but you probably aren't going to get that much more space or people with a smaller chair. But it's.
I guess
worth
that was
looking
just
at.
an example, like, is there capacity? And I don't know if there's budget to change the furniture that much.
We took in consideration the chair, people have to have a table to work at, a committee. So we took that into consideration with the chairs, and even if we maneuvered it a little bit different, changed the desk, you might not get that many more people in that room.
Right, I would rather go with the lower number personally, but
Right.
there is a difference between a seated capacity and an airflow capacity.
John?
I wanted to comment on safety, perception or real safety. And I said this at a previous meeting, I want to repeat it. And even if we limit capacity, and even if we could magically make all the rooms meet modern airflow capacity, there is no way you can be safe from the spread of an infectious disease. You can take precautions, but there's no way this building will ever be safe from the spread of infectious disease. So it's a false sense of security if you think we're going to achieve that.
Agreed.
Joe?
Two things are very apparent to me at this moment in time. One is we need to give Kevin marching orders as soon as possible with having every committee being Zoom capable. Second thing is the HVAC system override that is available in the Senate needs to happen in the House as quickly as possible. I don't know what the time frames are for those two things to happen. When I consider seating capacity in my room, I can look at the numbers that were provided to us. I know that in my little room, I could put 15 people in there if the override system is in place. I can certainly enforce that, but I'm concerned as a chair if a school class of 5 individuals from Linden Institute walks into my committee room with a request to be able to see what is happening inside a committee. I have a hard time with a hard and fast rule that prevents me from saying, okay, you can be in here for 10 minutes and watch. And I know that violates the chief's #1 rule of being consistent and equally applied. So I'm comfortable with the seating capacity number. But I think there has to be some discretion afforded to the chair.
So are we ready for a straw vote, at least on using the seating capacity as a guide? Allison?
May I just ask Janet, who has done the number differences, what is the number differences for some of the key rooms we're talking about between the seating capacity and the middle number here, the room capacity based on airflow? So what's the,
Senator Benning, we'll take him as an example. His
so
room
Senate
seven.
institutions, like
Yeah.
room 7.
Yeah, so the ASH-rate original numbers for the overriding number for the system is 15. And we came in and looking at seats to 13. Because that was actual bodies and seats. So it wasn't that far off.
Right.
Yep.
So that's good. That gives us can you give us a couple more just to give us a sense? I mean, because I think.
Remember,
this is-
you're just dealing with the Senate,
Which has override capability.
right? The House
Right,
is
but I'm-
very different.
Yeah.
But she may have some numbers for that.
So Senate appropriations has an override of 23 people, and we just counted seats at 22. So it was very similar.
And what about a House committee that, like a House approach, let's say, room
Suppose-
42?
It's in the 30s,
It has an airflow capacity of 6.
44. 42.
Yeah.
Room 42.
Yeah, so it has a six capacity, so we didn't, at that time, we didn't. hit the
There's no
numbers on that.
override.
Right, there's no override, but there are seats. So if we're going
Right.
by seats, and
We
let's
didn't
say,
actually, we didn't go to those rooms yet.
oh, okay, so you didn't do that.
I don't
Okay.
think we did.
Sorry, I
So-
thought you said you
I
had
think you
done
have to
it.
keep, I think you have to keep this in context in terms of seating capacity, particularly on the House side. Because we're opening up some other larger rooms here for those particular committees that will be having issues that will be driving in a lot of folks. So let's hypothetically, this is really important, hypothetically, let's say that House Judiciary Committee is going to move into one of these rooms. Well, House Judiciary Committee is a larger room than House Institutions Committee or House Agriculture Committee. So one of those committees could move into Judiciary Committee room, which then increases your seating capacity from your previous committee room.
Right.
We've got to keep that in the back of our minds. So maybe what was occurring in House Education, House Ag Committee room, House Institutions Committee room, House General, House Natural Resources, they're going to be in a larger room. So you have to think about who came into those rooms to begin with that will now have more room. That's what we've got to keep in our minds when we're talking about seating capacity. If they're in room 9 or room 10, they've got a much larger seating capacity than the committee room they vacated. So let's keep that in mind.
Right.
I think we've got to move on, folks. We've been on this for over an hour. We've got to move on. So I'm going to push a straw vote. Should we have seating capacity of that particular room as a barometer in terms of how many people we let in the room, knowing that there's going to need to be some fluidity?
You want us to raise our hands or say?
Yes, all those in favor, just raise your hand.
If this is seating capacity or
Mhm.
air.
Seating capacity. We're not doing airflow. We made that decision 2 weeks ago. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 7, 8. I keep forgetting about you, Steve. So we have 8. Those opposed?
I'm not there yet.
Okay, I would support the seating. So it's 9-1. Straw vote. Right?
John, are you not
Did
there
I-
because of what you said earlier?
Did I count? I hope I counted you.
But I
1,
was
2,
just trying to figure out the dynamics and I don't see it's gonna work. That's my issue. How it
Fair,
can
totally
possibly
fair.
work. Who's gonna be in there or how you keep, sounds like a mess.
Well,
Well-
that's why it's not a binding vote at this point.
Pardon, right, it's not a final
Just
vote.
to move
because
us along.
Just
because-
says, okay, now we think that's what we want to do, so how are we gonna be able to do it?
How are we going to be able to do it? So then that leads into the streaming capacity of committee rooms, which I'm thinking we're probably going to make a recommendation that there is live stream in the committee rooms.
We could take a straw poll on that. and
I
I-
want to do a straw poll on live streaming for the
Yes.
committee rooms. Okay, those in
Well,
favor?
wait,
Whoops,
wait.
John.
There's a difference between live streaming and that stream being out there sitting on YouTube forever.
That's a
And
different.
those are very different for me. And I don't, so if we're voting yes, are we talking about it going out where people can see it? Or are we talking about the latter where it sits there forever?
I think Kevin spoke to the ability for us to make that decision.
I'm just wondering what a yes vote means.
I
Kevin,
think what I'm perceiving is a yes vote would be the preliminary discussion of yes, we're going to do some
Right.
live streaming, not the particulars in terms, can we edit it? How long do we keep it in perpetuity?
Okay,
Just
Thank
that first layer.
yes.
It's
thank
not the deep dive. Okay.
Ask a question.
Mhm.
So there are two things. There's live streaming on YouTube and then there's Zoom participation. And they can be separate questions. And wanted to ask Kevin, what we're doing right now is both, right? We're doing live streaming and hybrid participation. I haven't watched what that looks like on YouTube. Is it comprehensible? How does it work?
How's it working, Steve? Steve Perkins.
Steve has given us his feedback.
Trying not to set a bad precedent by hollering from the corner again,
Yeah,
like I
right.
did a moment ago.
This is
So
perfect, what we're doing right now. This is good.
pretty well. Kevin Moore, Legislative IT. So we are video conferencing and live streaming right now. The video is actually pretty good. The limitations we have really come down to video quality on the YouTube side. The reason we're laid out this way is so we can get a good view of the entire room. Then you'll notice there's a camera directly in front of me, picture in picture, works pretty well. I won't get into resolution. There are some limitations in resolution quality that we're still trying to work through to provide a high definition, but it works pretty well. It works really well. The audio quality is as if you're sitting at the table more or less. It's going to be a little bit better for your Zoom participants because they can manipulate their settings and they have a direct microphone level quality into the meeting. So a little bit better for Zoom participants than it is for the YouTube folks, but it's pretty good. I encourage you to check out some of our live streams, particularly the ones in the Senate chamber. Those were our best ones.
Of course.
They were great.
Because I think it might be two questions, or we can take it as one.
Or three.
Total combined question, but I would like to make sure that we continue to have the ability for witnesses, and frankly, members too, but that's a whole different question, and probably not within our purview, but to have remote participation, so witnesses can Zoom in remotely. And I would also like to continue with the YouTube live streaming, because I think it will cut down on the number of people here and broaden access to our work more broadly. So, but it's two separate things.
Well, and there's a third, which is how long is it capped? Is
We'll
it out
get,
there
we'll
for-
get into that. I just want that broad discussion of live streaming, which could include and does include Zoom.
I'm sorry, I just, Kevin, is what I'm seeing there, us sitting at the table, is that
Yes.
what YouTube is seeing?
So YouTube is seeing what you currently see in that green box in the upper left-hand corner. What you see in this room is not necessarily what YouTube sees. The committee assistant, Mike Ferrant in this case, sets that up to make sure that they see the active speaker in this case. Most committees were run with gallery mode previously, but once you're in this in-person setting, we can't necessarily get a shoulder up view of every individual, especially in these larger spaces. So.
So the
we're just
YouTube will
limited.
basically be the person talking.
Correct.
Right.
Whoever's
Particularly
actively
who's
speaking.
talking.
So if Mr. Perkins here starts speaking, this committee will disappear as far as what YouTube sees. And he'll show up to YouTube as he's done speaking. If this room takes over, it'll switch automatically.
That's what I thought, I just want to be clear.
So I'm going to turn it over to Joe because Joe has a question. So then who shows up on the screen? Is it our whole committee that shows up on the YouTube screen?
It is.
Not
So
Joe.
right now, if you look at the screen, you'll see that green highlighted box.
Mhm.
You'll see the picture in picture. I'm in the upper left-hand corner of that screen. That is what's actively being shown to YouTube right now.
Okay.
Just you. No.
No,
both. The whole green
breakout.
box. So if you turn right around, look at that whole green box.
It's us as well as the insert of Kevin.
No, it should be active speaker.
That's cool.
It's pretty neat.
Well done.
We're working on it. There's some improvements still.
So Joe,
One way or the other, technology that you have to install in a committee room is the same. Isn't that correct?
It's similar. There's a lot of hardware differences. The software is the same. Yes.
Decisions though about how we, whether Mike Farrett or whatever committee system is manipulating what is seen. Decisions about that, it seems to me, come after we decide the basic question that every committee room should have the technology available. That's a pretty simple statement, and you need that marching sooner rather than later. Submit to the chair, waiting to a report in August is not a good idea. If we have the ability to advance a universal consensus that these rooms have to be equipped with the process, we can make decisions about how it appears later on down.
I think that's a fair statement, Senator. The piece that I want to focus on is the where again. So we understand at this point that it's this committee's recommendation to, or soon to be, straw poll, that it is likely that it's this committee's recommendation to live stream. And I understand some of the room decisions are still up in the air. If we could check off boxes of we're definitely using this particular room and kind of work our way down through the list, that's an approach. Right now, what we're doing to try to save time is making some assumptions based off of these conversations, what rooms we're not using in order to try to put equipment lists together. And then really broadening that scope at current. So being able to move forward is two decisions, what rooms, and yes, we're live streaming. And then we're off and running.
But we don't have the legislative authority to tell. We're in a funny situation here as a committee. We can say, yes, this is our recommendation, but we don't, I don't believe we have the.
We can recommend
We can
that we don't
recommend,
use
but the
Senate
final
Ag, for
authority
example.
is management committee.
Totally agree that it is, but there's nothing that prevents us from advancing this conversation to JLMC as soon as today is over. There's nothing that prevents it. We do owe them a report in total on August 15th, but he's got to make decisions about purchasing equipment and setting things up. And the sooner we get that ball rolling, the better off we'll be in January.
So let's at least get a straw vote here on live streaming, which also in my mind certainly incorporates Zoom. I know that there's a
There
difference.
differences.
But I'm just kind of lumping that all together. That all committees, all committee rooms, all rooms that are operating as a committee room would have the capability of live streaming and Zooming. Do we have a straw vote on that?
Yeah.
Just a question, what about the chambers? Are we?
We're not talking about the chambers at this point. We're
It's a big
talking about the committee room, the rooms that are going to be used for committees.
Right.
That's what we're talking about.
So are we voting?
Are we ready for a vote, for a straw vote? All those in favor, raise your hand. Let's see. Okay, so we're unanimous in that. Is that 10? And you're not voting as weighing in for the commissioner.
I'm not permitted to vote.
I don't know if you would be. You're there. The commissioner would be voting because the commissioner is a member.
Go for it, Eric, live dangerously.
So the support of the committee, I support the committee's decision.
Just want to say, Madam Chair.
I know, I get that.
I want to say, Madam Chair, that David Sheets has come a long way on this conversation since we first talked about this.
Thank you.
It is acknowledged.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Really. So I take what Kevin is saying about we've got to start fine tuning what rooms we're not going to be using as committee rooms. And we don't know that yet. Also, we've got a lot more on our agenda that we haven't touched on. John,
That last question raised a question for me, and if this is a difficult answer, just say so, but I'm wondering why Zoom as opposed to the others?
it's terminology. That's all.
As
I know, I know.
In terms of WebEx or whatever it may be.
But is there a reason that we picked Zoom?
Talk to them.
Yes, it's so much better than Teams.
Okay, it's not a very simple explanation. Okay, thank you. That's all I needed to know.
Thank you. It's beyond my pay grade. Allison.
I'm happy to begin focusing on rooms that we do not want to use. And I would recommend right off the bat that we not use 26 or 47. And then we just need formal. Oh, those are Senate Ag and what was Natural Resources in the House, which has now become a conference committee.
We're not using that anyway.
I'm
Yeah, I got it.
just saying, we could start. Low hanging
We
fruit here.
came to a
Let's not
decision.
use the ones
We did that.
we're
We
already not
did,
using.
hang on, folks. We came to a decision 2 weeks ago that there were 5 committee rooms.
Right.
We forgot natural resources, but that's in the mix too. We have 5 committee rooms. We have 4 on the House side. 5 on the House side. We have 2 in the 30s. We have, I'm putting Natural Resources Committee back upstairs.
Right.
We have 3 in the 40s. That's 5. and we have Senate Ag.
Right.
So that's 6. The rooms that are available are the Ethan Allen Room, Room 9, Room 10, Room 11, and the lounge.
Right.
So we've got 6 committee rooms that we're looking for, and we have 5 rooms that we've identified could be used as committee rooms in the interim.
Right. Can you just remind us what the rooms are in the 30s and 40s? that
In the
you-
30s, it's House Ag, it's House Institutions.
Right,
Those are the 2 smallest rooms. In the 40s, it's House Energy and Technology, which is around the corner there by the elevator, House Natural Resources Committee, and House General.
that's right.
So if you think through this, House Government Operations Committee, they're going to be dealing with pensions. They got reapportionment. They could have a lot of people coming through. They could be in a bigger room. You could put House General in House Gov
Yeah.
Ops. You know, got to think. So then I think what Kevin was asking was also, what rooms are we going to use in 109 and 133 and for what purpose? That goes into our overflow discussion. Okay? I'm concerned we have someone here from Joint Fiscal Office to start talking about their space needs and human resources. And also, we wanted to talk about, we're taking the lounge out. We're taking the coat room out. So how we function, we're going to need something. What's also dangling out there, whether we like it or not, is whether senators will share committee rooms. If senators are willing to share committee rooms, we can free up a couple committee rooms to possibly be used as a lounge. We don't know. I'm putting that out there, to much chagrin of senators. But this is an interim. We all are going to have to participate, and we're all going to have to make some changes. So I'm putting some of this stuff on the table so we can get off the dime. Alice.
I would support right now recommending not using those exact rooms. Room 26, 47, 32, 33, 44, and House Energy Debt 41. I would recommend we not do that. I've also thought, lounge, some of us work at night, and the lounge could still be used at night after the committees are done for the day. We could still use the lounge at night, which would be very helpful. So the after dinner crowd could still have its club meetings.
Ruth and Joe?
I'm still trying, the lounge
Sounds like an option.
is an underutilized space as it is. If we're freeing up, I'm sort of talking, I haven't figured this out yet, but if we're freeing up all those house rooms, couldn't those rooms serve as informal lounges? So that we don't only have one big room that's a lounge, but we have a bunch of smaller rooms that maybe have the capacity of, 6 people can be in there at a time or something like that. That would be lounges. So we don't need one big lounge. And senators, if we don't share rooms, have our committee rooms that we can use as a lounge when we're not in committee. So it seems to me that the coat room is a more problematic thing that we need to figure out a space for than the lounge. Even though I would love that we all had our own offices, frankly, but that's not on the table.
Yeah.
And it's not on the table. Joe and then John.
So legislative lounge, each one of us has been equipped with an iPad. Each one of us has a seat in a committee room. In the Senate's case, 2 committee rooms. We, on a temporary basis, don't need to have a legislative lounge. I am probably one of the people that uses that lounge more than anybody. You will find me in this building, and Janet can back me up, before 7 a.m. every morning in the legislative lounge. That's where you'll find me. but we don't need to have it on a temporary basis. That rule ought to be used for committee purposes, for those committees that can be put in there without permanent damage to the room. Because I am very sympathetic that that was the Supreme Court at one time, and it should remain so. But there may be a way to divide that room into committee space. And we try to utilize that if we possibly can. Even if it's not committee space, it could be a co-room, whatever the case may be.
Allison?
So the other part of my recommendation, other than taking the rooms off that we have discussed and not using those for committee rooms, is to use 9, 10, 11 in the lounge for committee rooms.
So that's part of the whole.
Those, that, I would say that is
Well,
having,
Ethan Allen, keep forgetting Ethan Allen. Because that's freed up too.
but that frees up as a swing space. And it's, which is what it was always before natural resources got it.
We've
And-
got 6 committees we're looking for space.
Yeah.
We've
So
got
we could use
5.
the Ethan Allen room too. I
We've
just,
got 5 rooms. 9, 10, 11, the lounge and Ethan Allen. And we have 5 House committees and 1 Senate committee.
in the other part, I would,
Mhm.
we could, I think, have one Senate swing room that could be, have a morning and an afternoon. Senate ag, could be in the morning in, let's say, Gov Ops, and we could share Gov Op. I mean, I'm just throwing it out. It strikes me that we could solve temporarily the, with one or two Senate rooms that could share. But I don't think it's that challenging. And Senate Economic Development could, possibly, I mean, we have good sized rooms with nice airflow. We should be able to take on more as a result of having that additional benefit of the HVAC, of the,
Override.
the override ability. So I think that the Senate should be generous in this regard and lead with generosity and consider at least one of the rooms sharing 2 committees.
So there
Sure,
was,
I do have a response to that. I don't really want.
well, go for it.
Our committee assistants have been very adamant about the need for people to continue in space all day long. Our committee chairs have not weighed in on that conversation, but I would say 99.9% confident that no committee chair is going to be either happy about or willing to share space with another committee, because it interrupts their ability to function all day long in planning for their committee process. I don't know the rationale behind sharing the Senate committee space if the vacated space is not going to be used productively. Certainly, it would not be productive to call that a Senate lounge. I question the wisdom of using it as a Senate cloakroom when we have a Senate cloakroom upstairs and each one of us has a hook where a coat can be hung. I also feel that there are practical reasons why trying to share committee room space is not going to make sense. Each committee stores committee files in the room. If one committee's files have to be added to another committee's files, you're having a direct impact on the number of people who can be in the room for capacity purposes. As somebody mentioned earlier, furniture in the room does become problematic. So for all of those reasons, I would be adamantly opposed to any committee in the building, whether it's a House or Senate committee, trying to share space with another, because we're exacerbating the problems that we're trying to address.
So with that said, does that mean that Senate Ag is not at play here? So that we end up with 5 House committees? in these other rooms.
I think
That's
Senate Ag has to be in play. And Senate Ag has to be in play in a different fashion. I don't know that we have breached this subject. Janet Miller and Chief Romai are going to hang me for making this statement. But I come back to the conclusion that room 1,
Sergeant at Arms room.
Sergeant at Arms room should be a committee room where Senate Ag goes. I think there's no reason that I can explain. I haven't asked Janet or Matt to tell me, but from my perspective, I agree you need to be centrally located. I agree that there is a reason to have you in a place where the entire building can be accessed very easily. And I keep looking at room 9 as the answer to that question. I do not know, I don't pretend to know what the problems would be trying to combine the Sergeant at Arms office with the police office in one location where the pages could still come and go. We find coat space somewhere else. I know that's different. I'm still hoping that all of this is going to be temporary while we figure out longer term issues. But I can't see that space remaining as a space as big as the Judiciary Committee room, or close to it, if I see my numbers correctly. And having only 2 people working there, that does not make sense to me. But room 9 doesn't give you the ability to look out the front window, but we have technology that could cover that. And in fact, is covering it right now. If I remember my viewing of the command center over at 109, that capability is there. So I would love to hear the counter arguments. I just haven't heard them as to why those 2 offices couldn't be combined.
So we'll lose a committee room.
Yeah.
Well, you're not technically losing one, you are shifting agriculture out of the room where they are and putting it into a space that would be ideal for them. Is you are combining the police office space and the Sergeant at Arms space into one location.
So you're saying the where Matt is now by the elevator would be open for use, and then what do you do with Senate Ag committee room? That's open.
The same question as before. Does it become coat space? Does it become some other entity's space? But certainly it's too small for Ag right now.
So this is interesting. John and then Allison.
I keep,
Expect angry emails later on.
I keep seeing the same problem come up, that we have counted 6 rooms that we shouldn't be used for committee rooms and identified 5 spaces for committee rooms. I don't see any solution to that other than having 2 of the Senate committees share a room to free up the room. That's the only way I see that we can reasonably get to usable size rooms to make up for 6 we're going to lose. I don't see an alternative.
If you take the furniture from one room that has the files from that committee, and put it into the other Senate committee room, you're decreasing the number of seating capacity spaces.
It's still, we're still short a room. We can't keep all the committees in the building. If we're going to eliminate 6 rooms as committee rooms, we have to find 6 spaces. And right now we've only found 5. I have
So
not
it
heard
doesn't
of-
solve the bigger issue.
does
You've
not.
solved your Senate Ag
Well,
issue, but
unless-
you haven't solved the bigger issue.
We're
Unless
still
you
missing a
divide.
room.
If you divide the legislative lounge, have picked up a room.
Can't do
On a
that
temporary
because
basis.
We've
we
already decided we
looked
can't
at
do it.
that with BGS. There's some real issues, circulation and access, particularly ADA access for the fireplace side of the lounge, because that door down that corridor is not
Right.
large.
It's not accessible.
And availability of materials and design. There were a lot of reasons that came up that would make dividing that room problematic.
And
by
we tried to
January.
divide this room. And you're
Yeah,
getting
that's
into circulation issues.
Materials.
Materials.
And contractors problem. I mean,
So Anthony and Allison and Ruth, did you have any?
I just was gonna ask about room 11.
Yeah, we looked at that
Yeah.
last week. Anthony?
I'm only saying this because I think we're just brainstorming here.
Good. I hope we're just
I don't
brainstorming.
want to get kicked out of my committee assignments or anything, but if I remember correctly, the pro tem's office used to be the Senate Agriculture Committee room years ago. And I don't know where the pro tem's office was at that point in time, but I know that Senate Ag, with the Senate Ag Committee met, it was pro tem's office now. It was the Senate Ag Committee room. I just put that out there.
Is that room any bigger than the actual? It's pretty small.
well, it's got a window.
I don't know.
It's bigger.
It has to be bigger than the Senate Ag. Committee.
Where, we have those numbers someplace.
Yeah, it's right here. In Senate Pro Tem has 19 people.
Prior.
Yeah,
Seven.
what's the square footage, Allison? Do you know?
Oh, it doesn't say, I've just got the
I
thing
know
on the
we have
HVAC
those
system,
numbers someplace.
but it has a 7 ability.
David, do you have that, David?
The pro
Sheets?
tem used to be in the Pink Lady at a time when House Majority Leaders and Minority Leaders, as well as the pro tem, all had offices on the second floor of the Pink,
Way
of the
back.
Pink Lady. Now, this was before
That
the
was in
staff.
80s. This was
Right.
in the 80s.
This was before the staff had grown to the point where they needed the entire building,
Right.
including a
it's not
third
appropriate.
floor that did not even exist at that time. Right.
45 square feet. Pro tem is 180.
185 square feet for Senate Pro Tem and 145 for current Senate Ag. So then where do you put the Pro Tem? You just do a flip?
We could, yeah, I mean, it's possible temporarily, but also I think I was saying, we haven't talked about the lieutenant governor's space either, which is a nice, good sized corner room. Which is, I mean, we haven't talked about
The
certain.
lieutenant
rooms.
governor is the presiding officer of the Senate.
And does that mean the
I don't know.
space is off limits that we can't talk about? I mean, we've trying to be flexible
Grinding
here.
of teeth from the sides.
Okay, I think it's time for a break.
Okay. If we're having a break, I've got cookies.
We are taking a break. 10 minute